Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dcpc. I'm your host, DC. In case that wasn't obvious. Sometimes it's not. You know, sometimes it's not obvious. Anyways, we're doing a little Monday show. Since I won't be doing a Tuesday show. So we're going to do a little combination show. Talk about what happened last week. I did not end up streaming on Tuesday last week because it was the election, and that's the one day that everybody streams. So, you know what? It really helps if my headphones are plugged in. Right now they're just there for aesthetics. That's live TV, ladies and gentlemen. Nice. All right. Yeah, I was making dinner. By making dinner, I mean messing up dinner. Apparently, you have to boil potatoes to make mashed potatoes. But regardless, we're gonna move on. So here's our docket for today. Trump won. So now what's happening? I bet. I mean, by now we're all well aware of what happened. As many on the left, many leftists predicted that this was going to happen, and so it's not a surprise that this was the result. Am I happy about it? Absolutely not. Did I expect it? I mean, kind of. You still don't want it, right? You just want. Yeah, Kamala would have been the better pick, but she's not. She's not ideal either. So, if it was between supporting genocide and not, I decided to not. So I voted for Dela Cruz. I don't know. I feel like either way, things would be, bad. Now, it's going to be worse for certain group, for immigrants, for the LGBTQ community, for women. Although Trump has said he's not going to ban abortion, I don't know how much you can believe him. He is a compulsive liar. But we'll see. We will all see. Yeah. So, also, we're going to talk about how, especially on election night, and for the most part, the streamer space is being dominated by right-wing individuals, whether it be on any platform. These individuals are leaning more right-wing. And it sucks to see this but it makes sense when you think about it. These individuals, especially in American politics, they tend to lean more center right to conservative. It's funny. I had an argument with a conservative friend of mine, and he was like, well, the majority of the country is conservative. And I was like, no. You're making it up. No, I can't believe that. And he was right. He was totally right. Even in the liberal state that I live in Massachusetts, they it's still like we still have a lot of Puritan laws. We still have a lot of leftovers from the Puritan. Like, yeah, sure, we legalize gay marriage. We have a state healthcare system, which was done by Romney. It was so funny because Obamacare was just a copy of Romney Care when he was governor of Massachusetts. So, yeah, and it's just like we have a history of having Republican governors, but who are, more like centrists rather than actual like conservatives. Because I just don't think an actual conservative would win in Mass. Um, yeah. Uh, Again, war in the Middle East still going on. Israel still attacked. Although the Israel is somewhat, they've allowed more aid to come into Gaza. It's still bad. Um, there's airstrikes in Lebanon, and then later on, we're gonna continue on our series. Watch part 2 of Eyes Wide Open's History of the CIA, which should be a fun little experience. He always had, or they, I don't want to assume their gender, but they always have really, really good videos. So, all right. Yeah, so we'll do that. And then we're going to end the night with a little gaming. Just to round out my contractual obligation. No, just we're going to play a little Star Trek Fleet Command to, have a little bit of, what could be. What could be. And yeah, so we will go from there. Let's start with some of the news.
Welcome to America Decides. This election, and make no mistake, we are already deep into it, is no garden party. You've probably heard about the Madison Square Garden Trump rally and the quote-unquote jokes told there, jokes that Republicans in competitive races are now falling all over themselves to denounce as racist.
Also, it's super funny to see Melania for the first time in, like, I don't know, 8 years. Ever since Trump left office, Melania's been MIA. I think she's just been living in New York the entire time, and he likes to live in Florida. Well, I think he kind of has to in order to run from there. But she doesn't want to travel, which I get it. And so, like, finally, when they're at Madison Square Garden is when she finally appears, and she's like, yeah. And it's just funny seeing her now. Because she has been absent for a while.
Racist, but did you hear this?
Who's going to stand up for our daughters? Who's going to stand up for the girls of America, the women of America, the families of America? Who's going to stand up and say the cartels are gone, the criminal migrants are gone, the gangs are gone, America is for Americans and Americans only?
Who is an American? Who gets to have the American dream, and who will decide?
What he did last night is not a discovery. It is just more of the same and maybe more vivid than usual.
I realize this is not the right video. It meant to be a different one. Hold on a second. I already watched this one last week, or whenever I watched a video 2 weeks ago. So this was supposed to be something else. All right.
Donald Trump will become the 47th President of the United States.
I want to thank the American people for the extraordinary honor of being elected your 47th President and your 45th President.
Also, he's our second Grover Cleveland, which is a president who has served 2 non-consecutive terms.
So I think we should start off by just saying what's happening, and then my big question is going to be, how should we be thinking about this?
We now know that Donald Trump is returning to the White House. American voters have seen what Trump had to offer, and at least a critical mass of them decided they want to do the same thing again.
I called up some colleagues at Vox to ask what we should be making of this moment, and I ended up spending a long time talking to Zach.
I'm Zach Beecham. I'm a senior correspondent at Vox.
Zach writes about reactionary politics, the right wing, basically. And the thing that he really wanted me to understand is that even though the outcome of this election is the same as the 2016 election, the Trump who is about to become president is different.
Donald Trump is much more organized. He knows what he's doing, has a series of distinct policy objectives that he's reiterated again and again. It will be in a lot of ways fundamentally different than what we all lived through 4 years ago.
Lock up the Bidens. Lock up Hillary. Lock them up.
The first time Trump was president, he wanted to do all sorts of very controversial things, and a lot of times he didn't actually end up doing them. One big example is wanting his critics and political opponents to be prosecuted. He was constrained by other parts of the political system, the guardrails of democracy. I'm Andrew Prokop. I cover politics. The guardrails encompass first Congress and the courts. But also within the executive branch, you have Trump's own appointees for top positions who often last time around proved unwilling to carry out some of the things he wanted to do. Then you also have the permanent civil service career employees that he can't fire at will. Well, first of all, the courts have grown more conservative and more Trump-friendly since he put 3 of his own.
So, if Biden was going to do a baller move, he would implement an executive order and make more judges. I believe that's within his power. He can just create more Supreme Court judges. So you could make 4 new spots, or, and what is more realistic, what they want to do is have 2 of the judges retire before Trump gets elected, because otherwise, because Sotomayor is up there in years, and I mean, she's only 70. She's not like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who should have retired. But anyways, it would be cool if he had just been like, boom, here's 4 new judges. Because the 9 number is arbitrary. You can have as many judges as you want. And so what they could do is, boom, here's 4 more judges. Oh, now there's a Democratic or liberal leaning going into Trump's term. So, because as of right now, the Republicans control the House, they control the Senate, they control the executive, they control the legislative. So, it's all bad. At least this way, they can maybe give us a win. Maybe give, liberals a win. Because right now, liberals are hurting. They're hurting bad. He's not going to do that.
Appointees in the Supreme Court. Congressional Republicans have grown much more pro-Trump. Trump and the people around him want hardcore MAGA true believers staffing the government who will not have these pesky qualms.
Yeah, he's looking for cult members rather than actual, like, competent people who understand government.
About legality or ethics or things like that. And regarding the civil service, Trump wants to use an executive order to reclassify thousands of people with civil service protections against firing as political appointees who he can fire, to then put in a lot of MAGA loyalists in their place instead. He's had 4 years to basically stew over, what he didn't get to do last time and what he would do differently if he was given another chance. And now he will seemingly get that chance.
We're going to have the largest deportation in the history of our country.
The mantra that Trump had on the border on 2016 was build the wall. That was his centerpiece of his immigration.
Yeah, now that's a Democratic talking point. Kamala herself is like, oh, we're going to build a wall. There's no... both parties have decided that deporting immigrants is the way to go. There's no leeway at all. You either do deport people. You either do deport people or you don't. Or you deport people or you deport more people. There's no how about we just give them asylum? They've been living here for so long. There's no compassion at all. Yeah, one side's like, we're just going to deport you. The other side's like, we're going to deport you and your family. Even the people who were born here. Everybody's getting deported. You get a deporting. You get a deporting. You get a deporting. Everybody gets deported. Yeah. It's not good. It's not good. Especially when you have a large percentage of Latino men voted for Trump. And now liberals are like, since, liberals are sore losers, they're like, they want to deport their Hispanic, they want to deport their Hispanic neighbors who voted for Trump. And it's just like, guys, come on, really? I mean, yeah, it's not a good look, but let the leopard eat their face. Don't premature the leopard, right? Just they'll figure it out.
Immigration platform that sort of changed over the course of his presidency, and increasingly he wanted to turn his attention not to the border but to the interior of the U.S., the undocumented population here. I'm Nicole Norea, and I cover politics and immigration for Vox. Under Biden, there were record levels of people arriving on the border. We've seen those numbers come down significantly in 2024, but when Americans are polled, large portions of them say that they want mass deportations. They might be thinking about people being deported immediately after they arrive on the border, but that's not what Trump...
That's also a very misleading poll, because sure, more do, but you're looking at less than 60%. You're looking at, okay, fine, maybe it's 55, 50, 51. But for the most part, like, you have 41% opposed. It's not, you can't call that a majority, right? It's not overwhelming. Sure, it's more. But the percentage, it's just like people are not opposed. Like, sure, some people may want mass deportation. I also don't know where this poll is coming from. But it just seems a little, I don't know, misleading to say that majority of people want mass deportation.
About people being deported immediately after they arrive on the border. But that's not what Trump's contemplating. He's trying to go into communities across the US, and we're talking about people who have lived here, for years and decades. That would sort of involve huge investments in law enforcement and also the cooperation of local law enforcement agencies.
Yeah, and during the 60 Minutes, they did a 60-minute segment on, like, this specific thing, which is it's going to be very expensive, very time consuming. We're going to have to hire a whole bunch of more border agents, processing people. We're going to have to build a whole bunch of facilities. They say they're not going to do concentration camps, but in order to do the sort of mass deportation that they're talking about, you're going to have to build concentration camps. Like, there's no way around it. Like, this is why the Nazis opted to kill the Jews rather than deport them, which is what they were originally going to do. The original thought was, we send them all to Madagascar, so we don't have to deal with them. Then they realized the logistics of that and found that it was easier just to put them in work camps and to murder them and to kill them en masse. And then they debated on what is the most efficient way of doing it, because they're German, and of course they are a people of the spectrum. So we're definitely approaching that territory, and especially with Trump, we're going to get more of those sort of fascist tendencies.
Agencies, which I'm not sure we would see necessarily in democratic states, but let's say in states like Texas and Florida, certainly you might find law enforcement willing to cooperate with federal immigration authorities there.
A landmark decision in American history as it relates to presidential power.
When Trump initially took office, the median vote on the Supreme Court was a moderate conservative, someone who would draw the line somewhere. Then Trump appointed a third of the United States Supreme Court. I'm Ian Millhiser. I cover the Supreme Court at Fox. Trump v.
Yeah, he got three. Got 3 picks. Or 2 picks. 3 picks. Regardless, he got to tip the scales the last time, and nothing's been done about it. Even though he had 4 years to do something about it. But no, Biden didn't want to do anything. Just like, I'm going to do infrastructure, Jack. Cool. Great. Thanks. Thanks, Obama.
United States is the decision that came down last July concerning Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's indictment of Trump for trying to steal the 2020 presidential election. Trump made this really outlandish argument that he could not be charged with the crime for any official acts he committed while president. Pretty much everyone thought that that argument was silly and ridiculous, and there was no chance that the court would ever adopt it. And then all 6 of the Republican justices adopted it. What that decision said, it said that Donald Trump is immune from criminal prosecution for crimes that he commits using the official powers of office. Trump is allowed to give any order he wants to the Department of Justice. The basic matter is just that anything he does can potentially be beyond the scope of the criminal justice process.
More than 40,000 Palestinians killed since the October 7th Hamas massacre.
Right now, the situation on the ground in Gaza is an extraordinary humanitarian crisis and a moral stain on the United States for enabling so much of this to happen. But it can always get worse. Trump has a blank check approach to Israel. He and his advisors don't believe in any of the even feeble restraints that the Biden administration had put on Israeli conduct. There are factions inside the Israeli government that have different visions of how to conduct the war. The extreme right on Netanyahu's flank, people like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, believe that Trump will let them do what they want based on what he said, what his advisors say, and what his political coalition at home wants.
Are you on board with the way the IDF is taking the fight in Gaza?
You've got to finish the problem.
These people have a maximalist vision of what they want the war to be. Actually seizing and taking Gaza for Israel and returning to settlement, right, to rebuilding Israeli outposts, moving Israeli Jewish citizens in to make sure that its control over the area never slips. That would mean not just temporary eviction of Gazans from their homes and their cities, which would be bad enough. It would mean creating a massive permanent refugee population. Outside of Gaza, in the West Bank, we can only imagine. Previous American position has been you shall not under any circumstances annex parts of the West Bank. It would be Israel declaring, in essence, its willingness to rule over the Palestinians in perpetuity. What I do know for sure is that a Trump administration would do nothing to punish them for it.
Okay, let's make this quick. I'm Adam. I produced this video. I think it is fair to say this is a historic moment. And one thing it shows is that we truly do not know what the future holds. In these next 4 years, journalism is going to be important. Things will be confusing. It will sometimes be a struggle to know exactly what you should be paying attention to. We would like to be a place that you come to have your biggest questions answered, whether on our YouTube channel, our podcasts, our newsletters, our website. Our reporters, like the ones that you have seen in this video, their job is to point you to what actually matters. If you believe in that mission, the best way you can support it is by becoming a Vox member. It supports all the work that we do at Vox, and honestly, it'll also probably just help us do more videos like this that are hopefully bringing you crucial information right when it is most valuable. You can do that at vox.com/memberships.
Trump declared he would veto a national abortion ban if he's reelected.
Trump winning the presidency is not good for abortion rights. I mean, he's been out there claiming that he's the father of IVF, that he's going to be great for women's rights, but he surrounds himself with lots of people who absolutely, do not have that as their goal. I'm Rachel Cohen. I cover social policy at Vox, and I've been really focused on abortion rights for the last 2.5 years since Roe was overturned. Something that has been confusing for voters is that I don't think we're going to see a federal ban coming out of Congress. The biggest way that Trump could, I think, use his executive power to restrict abortion rights is to push for the enforcement of the Comstock Act on the federal level. The Comstock Act was this law passed in 1873, and among other things, it banned mailing anything associated with abortion. When the Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide, the Comstock Act was rendered moot. It didn't matter anymore, but Congress never actually repealed it. Now that Roe has been overturned, you have a bunch of conservatives, including J.D. Vance, who are saying now is the time actually to enforce this zombie law that's been on the books for decades that people forgot about, and we should ban anything associated with abortion from being sent in the mail. So that could include not only abortion pills, which are used in the majority of abortions in the US, but it could also mean any medical equipment associated with, surgical abortion, like dilators or speculums. That would effectively mean a nationwide ban on abortion.
Yeah, and that's the scariest one, I think. They're all scary. Trump being so pro-Israel, that's frightening especially to the people of Gaza, because Biden was bad. He was really bad, like Johnson level bad, and he will go down as one of the worst presidents we've ever had. But Trump would be way worse. I can just see it now. He's definitely not going to be good at all. At all. I fear for the people in Gaza. I fear that, they're just going to get wiped out. and they're just going to move Israelis right in, create settlements. It's just going to, I'm so, like that one is, but abortion, that one too. Because, like, as states, many states have put in protections since Roe was overturned. But, you know, re-enabling the Comstock Act, as mentioned, any of that is scary. Especially because, you know, you have people like J.D. Vance who want to control women's bodies. And since they've won, it's empowered a lot of people on the right to say unhinged things, like Nick Fuentes saying, "Your body, my choice," and then subsequently getting doxxed, which, listen, I'm not condoning that you should dox anyone, but, you know, fuck around, find out. Like, what was he expecting was going to happen? And then somebody went to his house, rang his doorbell, and then got maced. Which I'm pretty sure that person can file assault charges, which would be really, really funny. And they should totally do that because they were assaulted. I'm not saying you should. I mean, listen, you be a shithead, expect shit to come your way, you know?
Some might say it's economic nationalism. I call it common sense.
The thing about tariffs is that the president has a lot of unilateral authority to impose them without Congress's will. I'm Eric Levitz, and I write about politics and policy. A tariff is basically a tax on an imported good. Usually the producer passes on the cost of that tax to consumers by charging higher prices to compensate for the tax. Trump's signature proposal on tariffs.
Yeah, and he fundamentally does not understand that. It is not a tax on a different country. It is a tax on the literal good that is being imported, and the importer has to pay that tax. So it just means foreign-made goods are more expensive. And again, I talked about this a couple of times. The reason that we had tariffs was so that people would, you know, that foreign-made goods would be so expensive or be more expensive than the American-made goods, so people would buy more American-made goods. Again, it's good in principle, but we're a globalized economy. It doesn't work like that anymore. Foreign-made companies, foreign companies are located in the U.S. and make goods. We have, especially cars, a lot of those parts are made elsewhere and then imported in. So, like, yeah, you may have, you know, let's say Chevy might be getting some part, you know, maybe their engines are manufactured in Mexico, or, you know, the steel that they're getting is from Canada or something like that, where they're importing goods to make your final product. And eventually, I mean, like those sort of we're going to see price increases for a lot of goods.
Tariffs in the 2024 campaign was a 10% tariff on all foreign imports, regardless of what country they come from and regardless of what kind of good it is, which includes things that the United States cannot possibly produce. There's no tax that you can put on foreign coffee beans that will make it possible to grow them in New England. The general consensus from economists is that this is going to significantly increase.
Yeah, the only climate that is suitable for growing coffee in the United States is Hawaii, which is an island that you would still have to import goods. So the price of actually importing the coffee beans, you know, when it comes to shipping and everything, because they have to either come by boat or by plane, which is more expensive, it's about the same than coffee that's coming from Colombia or, South America or somewhere in Africa. Uh it just, like, a general tariff makes no sense. It makes no sense because there are goods that we import because they are not able to be made in the United States. They are specific to a region, or, a country has a certain delicacy or something, right? You can get steak here. You can get an Angus beef here. You can't get Wagyu. I mean, that's a luxury good, but it serves the same sort of point, right? Like the coffee too, right? There's nowhere in the continental United States that is suitable for growing coffee at a large scale other than Hawaii, which has its own problems with, cultivating of fruits, especially since that's how the state was founded. But I digress.
Increase prices for Americans, as well as actually potentially undermining American manufacturing. I think that in general, voters.
Yeah, especially when plenty of American manufacturers have to import goods for whatever reason. Maybe they're cheaper overseas, so they do it. But yeah.
Tend to be sympathetic to any protectionist trade policy, but I think that in practice, as we've seen in the Biden years, voters are very sensitive to increases in consumer prices. On the other hand, though, this is something that Trump really genuinely seems to believe and hold as a core economic principle, really since the late 1980s.
We let Japan come in and dump everything right into our markets and everything. It's not free trade.
Put a 25% tax on products that come into the United States.
So that means that Trump plausibly could enact this tariff even if a majority of Republicans in Congress do not want him to.
It's time to put the divisions of the past 4 years behind us. It's time to unite. And we're going to try. We have to try.
In any democratic system of government, you need nonpartisan civil servants whose job it is to follow and implement the law. A lot of that stuff is technical, from National Parks Administration to the way the Defense Department is run, to the way that we protect and store our nuclear weapons. Trump doesn't like this. Neutral rules of governance obstruct his ability to govern like a kind of machine politician who uses government as a tool of rewarding his friends and punishing his enemies. That's why he hates what he calls the deep state.
Demolish the deep state. Obliterate the deep state. Dismantle the deep state.
We could be in a world where very swiftly, because there are no legislative guardrails against this, what if the IRS is now a fully political agency and audits start coming in along political lines? Businesses or media organizations that are critical of Trump start being harassed using the tax code as a means of punishing them. Think about everything that you rely on government to do. And now imagine those tasks being bent towards political ends. Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States again. And this time around, we'll make the first time look like child's play.
Yep. Yeah. Well, that's fun. All right. let us look at why right-wing creators... I guess I must have accidentally deleted all my videos. That's all right. We'll just look at this.
Let's get started with this. Hassan Piker on Kamala Harris's loss. You can't podcast your way out of this. A lot of these guys are right adjacent, maybe. They organically found themselves in this space. And I think the Republican Party took advantage of that very well. That same ecosystem doesn't exist on the left. It's not necessarily flooding the market with like a bunch of liberals. Like, oh, if we had like 8 more Pod Save Americas that kind of look like me, for example, like more bro-y, right? Then that would be fine. It's like, no, you can't podcast your way out of this problem. There was a list that looked at who had the top like election night coverage, who had the most views. And that list was populated exclusively by right-wingers except for me. So I'm out there. I'm here. But obviously, I'm not directly aligned with the top of the ticket or with many of...
Yeah, he wasn't aligned with the ticket at all. He had fundamentally come up against... He was not voting for either party because genocide was his red line, which it was for me too, which it was for many people, which is why they ended up losing. I mean, Biden got 14 million more votes than Kamala did. Trump got less votes than he did in 2020. But he still won because 14 million people. Because the Democrats lost 14 million votes. Because people either didn't want to show up or were uncommitted. And that's why she lost many of the battleground states. She lost Michigan because for that very point. She probably yeah, and so like really wanted Kamala to win. I think we all would have preferred that. But I couldn't in good conscience continue to support an administration that supported a genocide. And that was the thought on many people's minds. Especially when they ostracize that community by not allowing them to speak at the DNC. They've just continued. They belittled them by sending Bill Clinton to go scold them about why they aren't voting for Kamala, or to send Richie Torres, who is a representative from one of the poorest districts in the country, Bronx, who is going to Michigan to talk about... He is one of the most pro-Israel supporters. And they sent him to go talk to people in Michigan. And instead he spent time trying to get Hassan kicked off of Twitch, which wasn't going to work because he's a good person.
The establishment Democrats and their attitude towards consistently and stubbornly defending third-way neoliberalism. There is a divide here that does not exist within the Republican base of support that will develop a relatively conservative audience. So I think this is an issue that has to be solved top down. I think first, it's not about like 10 more podcasters or 20 more liberal podcasters. I think it's more so about the Democratic Party looking within and doing the correct autopsy after this 2016 2016 style defeat. I think not addressing the economic hardships that people were experiencing with direct policy prescriptions in a way that separated yourself from Joe Biden was probably the number one problem. Democrats have been doing some deep soul searching and plenty of finger pointing in the wake of Vice President Kamala Harris's decisive election loss. Some liberals suggested the key takeaway from the 2024 election is to build the left's version of Joe Rogan. There were several things that contributed to Donald Trump's massive victory among young men, but none were discussed with as much fury and fervor as the appearance on the podcast live streams hosted by Rogan, Theo Von, Aiden Ross, and the Nelk Boys. On the left, there's
Right. There's just so many right-leaning individuals. And so it is very, very tough to look at that and all of the appearances that Trump made and how Kamala was invited to be on Joe Rogan, but didn't for some reason. Either didn't want to or couldn't. When she could have. I mean, like, Joe also could have met her halfway. He's got how many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of money? I'm sure he could spare some for some Shure mics. Like, he could have met her somewhere. Like, if she was campaigning somewhere. I mean, the Call Her Daddy woman, the person who runs Call Her Daddy, or the host was able to turn a hotel room into like a little podcast studio. So if she could do that, I'm sure Joe could have done something. It could have even been like on a plane or whatever. I mean, he could have met her halfway, but clearly he didn't want to. He was playing favorites. I mean, he happened to have J.D. Vance on after, and Elon Musk. So clearly he was saying who was his favorite. And he did end up endorsing Donald Trump, so surprise, surprise. But, I mean, he was also a Bernie guy in 2020, but COVID broke his brain, and so he's now a right-wing guy.
Precisely one influencer who commands such large following. Hassan Piker, progressive Twitch streamer with 2.8 million followers, drew 313,413 viewers for his election night live stream. He was the third most popular streamer and also the only non-conservative streamer to break into the top 10 live streams that night. So Piker knows a few things about existing in the so-called bro space. Unfortunately for Harris and the Democrats, you can't podcast your way out of this problem, Piker told Newsweek on Friday. The 33-year-old influencer said it would do the Democratic Party little good to just flood the podcast market with 8 other versions of the popular Pod Save America show, a liberal political podcast hosted by a crew of former Obama aides. That's not the problem, said Piker, who would be somewhat to the left of the Pod Save boys. People like me exist. I have one of the largest election night coverages out there. The real issue is that the Democrats are up against the ideological divide between its base and the rest of the party. For Piker, the aphorism that Republicans fear their base and Democrats hate their base has never rung more true. Republicans can get away with taking advantage of that space, he said, emphasizing that there are billionaire GOP mega donors who share the same interests as right-leaning influencers, which leads to cross-pollination. But that same ecosystem doesn't exist on the left. It barely exists for Pod Save America. CNN and MSNBC barely even cross-pollinate, Piker continued. The liberal and I guess progressive outlets have completely shut off the independent media from entering their sphere of influence. And besides that, there is a deep ideological divide. For months, Piker has warned Harris's campaign that its failure to represent the voters who would cast more ballots for the Democratic nominee would lead to its collapse. He stressed that the Democrats need to move more to the left and stop trying to court moderate Republicans and center-right voters who proved again on Tuesday that they would not budge for Harris. Exit polls show that 94% of Republicans still voted for Trump, while independents only broke for Harris by 3%. In 2020, Joe Biden won independents by a whopping 13%. For the Democratic Party has actively chastised and pushed aside a lot of people that would normally vote for them, and they continuously had done this cycle after cycle, Piker said. And in the end, the bottom fell out. It wasn't just a large swath of young men who moved to the right. This year, Trump won 1/5 of black men, nearly half of Latino men, doubling his standing among the first group and moving Hispanic majority counties on average 10 percentage points to the right. In Dearborn, Michigan, the majority Arab community that helped Biden win in 2020, Trump won 42% of the vote to Harris's 36%. And none of it should have been a surprise, according to Piker. He argued that by sending pro-Israel Democrats like Representative Richard Torres and former President Bill Clinton in Michigan, Harris' campaign openly communicated that they did not want anyone who cared about Palestine to go out and vote for them. They actively...
Yeah, so I'm just going to cut this one a little short, but because he just talks mostly about the article he was mentioned in, which you can read about. But he was just, I mean, I just had said those same things, which, I mean, granted, I got from him, because I'm a stan. I'm obsessed. I hope he notices me one. No, but like, yeah, Kamala lost, and she did not take it well, nor are her supporters. There are also a wave of blue anon people who are like, no, she'll win with a recount. The voting machines, they were rigged with because some of them had internet and were using Starlink, so people thought that they were like used to like change the votes, but then it was also like, why just change it for Trump? Why just change Kamala to Trump and not like down ballot stuff? Which didn't make sense. So conspiracy theories are now going left. Everybody's going crazy. Facts don't matter anymore. It's just about feelings. Yeah. Anywho, all right, we're gonna move on to our final video portion of the evening, which is about the history of the CIA. Today we're going to be talking about Operation Sunrise and the plan for New Europe. This is a video series done by Eyes Wide Open. I would recommend you subscribe to them, like them, comment, do all the fun stuff. They're short, like 30-minute, like mini docs. They're great for some information, and yeah. So we're just gonna watch through this.
Now watch this drive.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Eyes Wide Open History of the CIA. Today, in part 2 of our series, we will be covering Operation Sunrise, Allen Dulles' scheme to ensure that Nazi Germany would persist after the end of the Second World War. As will be customary from now on, we will begin with a very short recap of last episode's topics, to make sure that everyone is on the same page about the topics that were discussed. I want these videos to stand on their own, so that new viewers can follow along, even if they missed previous parts. That being said, if you did miss the last part, do not fret. There's a card on the screen right now to link you to it if you want to check it out before, but that's totally not necessary. You'll be able to understand what I'm saying, at least to a certain degree. As always, I cite all my sources in the description of every video. When you see a number pop up at the top of the screen like this, you'll be able to find a matching bibliographic citation in the description. Without further ado, let's begin. In the first episode of this series, we explored the origins of the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor of the CIA. The OSS was directed by a man named Wild Bill Donovan, who recruited agents primarily from the American elite class, mostly from Wall Street, corporate law firms, and business circles. Wild Bill's top agent, Allen Dulles, was a lawyer at the Sullivan & Cromwell law firm, one of the preeminent corporate law firms on Wall Street. Dulles will go on to become the CIA's first civilian director, and be an instrumental force in expanding American intelligence. He will be a very important character for the beginning of this series. Sullivan & Cromwell, Dulles' law firm, represented several dubious clients, such as IG Farben, the German petrochemical megacorporation that manufactured the Zyklon B gas used in the Nazi gas chambers. IG Farben held an instrumental role in the Nazi war machine, manufacturing synthetic fuel and synthetic rubber, two resources that Nazi Germany desperately needed for the war effort. Allen Dulles continued to serve his clients' interests throughout the war, defying FDR's policies of unconditional surrender in Europe, as we will see throughout this episode. Now that the recap is complete, let us get into Operation Sunrise and the second part of this series. For most of the war, Allen Dulles was stationed at the OSS office in Bern, Switzerland. The setting was perfect for the dubious intelligence agent, as the neutral ground allowed him to parley with Nazis and fascists throughout the war, without attracting attention from Allied forces. One such meeting was with Nazi General Reinhard Gehlen, the head of the German military intelligence apparatus. This meeting was quite different, however, as it didn't take place in Bern, Switzerland. It actually took place in the state of Virginia. Let me break it down. During the war, Gehlen's agents worked across the Eastern Front, tracking down fugitive Jews and sentencing them to their doom in the Nazi camps or in front of a death squad. He reportedly got most of his intel from Soviet prisoners of war, and was known to employ torture as a main method of interrogation. Gehlen, being deeply embedded in Nazi intelligence, saw that the war was ending, and that Germany would lose if it had to face a US-Soviet alliance. But much like other high-ranking Nazis, he believed that there was a way that Nazi Germany could survive the war, through a separate peace. So, Gehlen devised a plan to meet up with advancing American troops in southern Bavaria. He brought with him a case of microfilms, detailing intelligence he had gathered about the Soviet Union. Upon meeting with those advancing troops, he then proceeded to leverage the intelligence that his agency had gathered to gain an audience with the leading agent in the budding OSS, Allen Dulles. Gehlen was subsequently shipped off on a DC-3 to a comfortable quarters at Fort Hunt military base in Virginia. There, he had a personal meeting with Allen Dulles. Upon meeting Gehlen, Dulles was immediately impressed with his resume and saw some use in the organization that Gehlen had left behind in Nazi Germany. Dulles decided that it was in the West's best interest to use the Gehlen org as a stay-behind army to subvert communist groups in Western Europe, and decided to send Gehlen back to Germany with US military handlers to continue to operate covertly. Gehlen reportedly began putting together clandestine guerrilla armies of ardent fascists and Hitler Youth that he organized into, quote, werewolf squads, who were ordinary citizens by day that turned into ruthless communist killers at night. This program would be administered under a US-backed paramilitary network in West Germany known as the Gehlen Organization. The werewolves would eventually be renamed to gladiators under the future CIA operation known as Operation Gladio. These would form the backbone of the future post-war European political climate.
So, the whole plan for especially Dulles and the CIA, or the OSS at this point, but what will become the CIA, is that they were adamantly anti-communist. They hated Dulles, specifically the Dulles brothers, and the elites, because, you know, the elites, the capitalists, all of this, hated communism. So they saw the Nazis, who were fascists, who, as an ideology, is anti-communist, they saw them as allies, even if we were fighting them. And we just so happened to be allied with the Soviets, with communists, because we had to. It was, again, we did not go to war with Nazi Germany. The only reason we went to war is because we were attacked. Japan had not attacked us. It is very possible we had not get involved in the war, other than, you know, leasing the British and various other groups, weapons and all sorts of other stuff. Because again, now before the war, we had a lot better. There was a lot more progressive movement. There was, you know, unions. Unions were flourishing. People were allowed to be communists. Once the 50s hit and the Red Scare happened, and McCarthyism, you're not allowed to be a communist in America. You can be prosecuted for it. And plenty of people did, and there were plenty of witch hunts that went against these people.
They would be activated at war's end and play an instrumental role in West German politics and the rest of Europe, as similar secret armies would be formed across the continent. Gehlen himself would eventually be reinstated as the head of West German intelligence, the BND, in the 1950s, becoming a legitimate part of the West German security state. Therefore, the Gehlen case illustrates the clear revolving door between the Nazi Party and the future framework of Western European security. I wanted to highlight the saving of Reinhard Gehlen here to introduce this character, as he will be recurring throughout this series, but also to show the background of the stay-behind networks that would form the backbone of Operation Gladio. As is so often the case in early CIA history, Allen Dulles was the architect of this plan. Now, Allen Dulles shared Gehlen's aspiration for a separate peace with Nazi Germany and would do everything in his power to reach that goal. These actions were highly treasonous, as FDR had promised Stalin at Casablanca that he would not sign a separate peace with Germany and would follow the Soviet policy of unconditional surrender. Dulles' moves to secure a post-war Reich were potentially explosive to the alliance between Russia and the United States, which ended up winning the Second World War. This, however, did not deter Dulles from...
Yeah, the reason we won World War II was not because of us. Not because of the Americans. Wasn't because of the British or French or any of the Allies. It's because of the Soviets. The Soviets are the reason that we won World War II. Without them, it would have been it would have been harder, if not impossible. Again, that was Germany's real blunder, was being like, okay, I know we just signed a peace deal with the Soviets that they could take half of Poland, but what if we attacked them? Just as winter is going to come. Yeah, let's attack them while we're still fighting a war in the West. Yeah. That was a very stupid move on their part. But without the Soviets, we would not have won. They're the ones who went into Berlin. They're the ones who liberated many of the concentration camps. They're the ones who suffered the most. As many, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, but there were also many of other people, members of the LGBTQ community, gypsies or the Romani people, political prisoners. That includes communists. But also, I think it was something like 20 million Russians died.
Moving forward with that plan, Dulles worked closely in Bern with international banker Thomas McKittrick of the Bank of International Settlements, or BIS for short. BIS had been founded in the 1920s to ensure the disbursements of reparation payments from Germany to the Allied powers following World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. By the 1930s, however, BIS had been fully integrated into the Nazi financial system. 5 BIS board members were card-carrying Nazis in 1940, and the bank was used to store stolen gold, art, and Nazi profits, much of which had been stolen from Holocaust victims. In response, the Roosevelt administration had implemented a policy called Operation Safe Haven that sought to confiscate Nazi assets from banks around the world. The fear was that these Nazi assets would allow the German elite to bide their time after the war and potentially regain control for the Reich at a later date, using these slush funds to fund their rise. This policy directly impacted the Dulles brothers, as 2 of their major German clients at Sullivan & Cromwell, IG Farben and Merck KGaA, the German pharmaceutical giant, had funds stored in BIS from their war profiteering in Nazi Germany. Both Allen and Foster Dulles, forever helpful to their clients, would see that BIS funds would remain with their Nazi clients until the end of the war. Foster Dulles, the Sullivan and Cromwell law partner, and Allen Dulles' brother, created an intricate network of shell companies that would shuffle BIS funds in a dizzying and complex series of transactions. This essentially worked to launder the dirty Nazi dollars. Allen Dulles, the OSS agent in Switzerland, then worked to destroy all paper records of these transactions, essentially shielding his brother Foster from any investigations. He was well placed for this as well. The headquarters of BIS was in Bern. Some of these assets would never be recovered, ending up in the hands of fascists across Europe. Much of this funding was unaccountable and likely aided in building the underground far-right networks that developed.
I mean, but this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to fund right-wing groups that would eventually just cause chaos and lead to, further right wing. Because ultimately, they were trying to protect capitalism. They were trying to make sure that you could have a unrestricted free market for as long as you wanted. And fascists were going to do that. They were going to let capitalism reign. And you know who wasn't? The communists. Communists would not let you do it. Because, they wanted, market regulations, against price gouging and to make sure that, you weren't getting screwed by your landlord or your, pussy shit.
Developed across Europe during the Cold War. Now, there's a couple of key takeaways here. Firstly, Allen and John Foster Dulles were beginning to display their cunning efficiency when they worked together as a team. The Dulles' circumventing of FDR's Operation Safe Haven foreshadows the brothers' future work they would undertake as CIA Director and Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s. Together, this team would lead Eisenhower's foreign policy apparatus, conducting some of the most blatant and illegal acts in American intelligence history. The acts undertaken by the Dulles-Eisenhower team would also cement the CIA as a ruthlessly efficient organization that gets results, no matter the cost or the morality of the action. The second element to note is John Foster Dulles' use of shell companies to circumvent financial oversight. Shell companies are fake corporations created usually by intelligence agencies or organized crime elements to mask illegal financial transactions. Shell companies will play a central role in the CIA's future operations, especially when drug smuggling or organized crime elements are involved. I think it's interesting to see this strategy used so early by the elder Dulles brother, but also, just as a side note, the use of shell companies is part of the reason why learning this history is so difficult. Following financial transactions is both tedious and difficult because of how complex these transactions can become. So when we get to more complex topics such as Iran-Contra or the French connection, we're going to see that shell companies play a large role and purposely obfuscate the public's knowledge of these transactions and of what these agencies are actually doing. Some of Dulles' most treasonous and morally reprehensible acts during the war were his concerted efforts to save Nazi war criminals from justice at Nuremberg. The big three Allied leaders, FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, had warned the Nazis that their war criminals would be punished to the full extent of the law. When the war came to a close, Churchill and Roosevelt even proposed taking matters into their own hands and personally shooting the 50 to 100 major Nazi war criminals on their list. It was actually Stalin, the man of steel himself, that recommended that they hold a trial to give their punishments legitimacy. The site they chose was Nuremberg, the German city that had once been the chosen location of Leni Riefenstahl's monumentous Nazi propaganda film Triumph of Will, which featured endless crowds of adoring Germans cheering on the Führer himself. In 1945, Nuremberg was quite different than that scene. It was a desolate place, much like the rest of Germany. Holding the war crime trials at the once illustrious propaganda center of the evil empire was clearly symbolic. Following the announcement of the Allied war criminal policy, Allen Dulles and Wild Bill Donovan immediately got to work devising plans to free useful Nazis from justice at Nuremberg. During their deliberations, Dulles and Donovan targeted, firstly, Hermann Goering, the Reichsmarshal of the Third Reich and Hitler's named successor. For the Wall Street OSS agents, Goering was simply one of them. He had amassed massive amounts of wealth during the war, organizing and consolidating the German steel, mining, and weapons industries under the Reich. He seemed like a perfect candidate for a potential separate peace, and clearly had immense resources that could be used to rebuild an anti-communist Europe. However, Goering was too high profile for even Dulles and Donovan to save. It would have raised too many alarm bells at the White House. They decided to focus their efforts on Hjalmar Schacht, Hitler's personal banker. Schacht came from the same elite world as
yeah. That would have been way too freaking suspicious if they had yeah, if they, if you had the second in command, the guy who was ultimately going to be your second in command, or, who took over after, Hitler stopped being alive, then he would, that would have been very suspicious.
As Dulles and Donovan, and remained a respected member of the international banking class in London and New York throughout the war. Most importantly for Dulles and Donovan, Schacht knew the location of the hidden Nazi fortunes that had been tucked away before the fall of Berlin. Well, long story short, Donovan was able to circumvent Robert Jackson, the Supreme Court justice assigned by Roosevelt to oversee Nuremberg, and he was able to save Schacht from sentencing. Allegedly, Dulles and Donovan fabricated sympathetic stories about Schacht that he was exiled from the party and harbored no anti-Semitic views. This was all fabricated. Although Donovan and Dulles were able to save Schacht from the gallows, not even these two men could save the interminable Goering, despite their best efforts. As we will see in the next section, which will comprise the rest of the video, Hjalmar Schacht was only one of many Nazis saved under the OSS's Operation Sunrise. Now, before we move on, there's one last thing that I will not be covering in detail, but is definitely worth checking out if these topics interest you. Immediately after the war, the US military intelligence apparatus, so at the Pentagon, got to work on Operation Paperclip, which was a scheme to smuggle Nazi scientists out of Europe to work on the American space program and nuclear weapons technology. Since this operation is not directly linked to the CIA, I will not cover it in detail, but it does plainly show how the entire US security state shared a desire to work with former Nazi elements to subvert the Soviet Union. Interesting note to make, this is the last time I'll mention Operation Paperclip specifically. On April 26, 1945, 2 weeks before the end of the war, SS General Karl Wolff, Himmler's chief of staff and a high-ranking Nazi war criminal, was surrounded by Italian partisans in an alpine estate at Lake Como in northern Italy. Wolff had been charged with the occupation of northern Italy following the collapse of the Italian fascist government in 1943. He was particularly hated and targeted by the Italian resistance fighters because of his revenge killing of civilians following attacks on SS locations, and the torture of several partisan fighters. Wolff had distinctive Aryan features, which made him somewhat of a celebrity in Nazi Germany. Allegedly, he had a close personal relationship with Hitler, who used to parade him around at high-ranking Nazi dinners as an ideal Aryan specimen. Ultimately, Wolff was a Nazi until his death, recalling his cherished memories with Hitler into his old age. Luckily for the embattled Wolff, he fit into Dulles's post-war vision of a separate peace with Nazi Germany, to block the Soviet-aligned Italian partisans before they reached the Eastern Front. This would guarantee that the West would have a say in post-war Italy. Wolff was a key of this plan, which Dulles called Operation Sunrise. Dulles realized that he could not take on the operation on his own, at the risk of insubordination, as the FDR administration was following a policy of unconditional surrender, as I had previously mentioned. Dulles instead put Gero von Schultz-Gavernitz on the mission instead. Gavernitz was the son of an illustrious European family that had funded Hitler's early rise. His family had broken away from the Nazis shortly after the war broke out, but this was less by his own volition and more by the Nazis cutting them off. Dulles had helped the Gavernitzes smuggle their money out of Germany during the later years of the war, as he had done with many other Nazis. Dulles had done a massive favor for the Gavernitzes. he decided to cash in that favor and task Gavernitz with saving General Karl Wolff. Gavernitz organized a team of agents to go rescue the SS commander. The team departed in the evening, accompanied by...
So, the OSS wasn't doing good. Like, they weren't doing good things. Like, they were trying to get Nazis. Just think about that, how this is our intelligence agency. This is, the CIA. And this is how they started. They weren't doing good things. They were just protecting corporate interests by saving Nazis when we were at war with them. The fact that he did not go to jail for treason, he didn't get... Nothing happened to him. He got off scot-free, is incredible.
By OSS agent Don Jones. Don Jones, known as Scotty by the Italian partisans, was a known agent in the region, having gained the respect of the Italian partisan network by actually doing what the OSS was created to do, fighting alongside the partisans and sabotaging Nazi forces. Scotty betrayed those that he had fought alongside during the Nazis' brutal northern Italian campaign. He was tasked by Dulles to provide cover for the rescue team during their convoy to Lake Como, and he was honored to do so. The convoy was made up of a motley crew of OSS agents, Italian partisans, and 2 SS agents that would help secure their passage through the checkpoints. The rescue party was attacked several times by partisans, but Scotty bravely jumped in front of the gunfire, hoping that the partisans would recognize him. This strategy mostly worked, despite the convoy getting hit by grenades and gunfire throughout the night. When they finally arrived at the Lake Como estate late in the evening, Wolff was awaiting them in his SS uniform. He offered them scotch that had been stolen from the British during the North African campaign. Shortly after, he changed into plain clothes, and they began their journey back to Chiasso. By 2 in the morning, the convoy safely returned to Chiasso and met back up with Gavernitz. Wolff was filled with gratitude for Gavernitz for saving him, and Gavernitz proudly shared the story of his Operation Sunrise mission for the rest of his life, writing about it sentimentally in his diary years later. On May 13, 1945, shortly after the Operation Sunrise rescue, Wolff was spending his birthday with his family and fellow escaped Nazi war criminal Eugen Dolman at the Villa of the Dukes of Pistoia in Italy. That afternoon, they were abruptly greeted by American tanks and Italian partisans, demanding Wolff's arrest. Wolff and Dolman were quickly escorted to the Bolzano dungeon, set up for Nazi war criminals. Although, they were swiftly transferred to the more comfortable prisoner of war camp at Cinecittà, the former Italian movie studio that had been converted into a POW camp. There, he was given special treatment, due to letters from Dulles recommending him as a moderate gentleman. He was given better food than the other prisoners, and even allowed to wear his SS uniform and sidearm while in the prison. Dulles had promised Wolff immunity from trials and stood by his promise, due partly to his respect and use for Wolff, but also due to the serious repercussions to his own career if Wolff testified about his treasonous acts in Operation Sunrise. Wolff was later transferred to a small US POW camp in Gmunden, Austria, which featured a lakeside resort and spa. Wolff was then reunited with his family and was also personally delivered his yacht, which he used that summer on the lake nearby. That same summer, the Nuremberg trials were taking place, and Chief Prosecutor Justice Robert Jackson wanted Wolff to stand trial as a, quote, major war criminal, which he clearly was. Dulles immediately got to work clearing Wolff's name, burying and destroying...
Oh, cool. So, while Nazi prisoners were being tried for war crimes, which they justifiably should have, this guy is, sailing in Italy. This is the history. This is the history of the CIA.
Destroying OSS documents that labeled Wolff as a mass murderer, complicit, and instrumental to the Holocaust. Instead of receiving the true reports of Wolff's atrocities, Justice Jackson at the Nuremberg trial received a report that labeled him as a, quote, moderate Nazi, and most importantly, a, quote, gentleman. Wolff did appear at Nuremberg, but as a witness, testifying against Hermann Goering. As the first rounds of trials ended, the Nuremberg Committee continued their noble quest to bring justice to outstanding Nazi war criminals. Wolf's name continued to be floated, as he was a high-ranking member of the SS. Dulles responded by forging a psychiatric assessment of Wolf, which diagnosed him with psychosis and landed him in a mental facility. Dulles tirelessly worked to save this horrible man because he saw a future for him in post-war Europe. But Wolf also held a trump card: blackmail. Wolf knew that Dulles was being insubordinate by attempting to save him. To continue to pressure Dulles to take increasingly illegal and immoral steps to free him, Wolf even sent a letter to Harry Truman outlining some details of Operation Sunrise. Dulles was furious, but he had no choice but to continue working to free Wolf. Finally, in 1948, Dulles was able to secure Wolf's transfer to a jail in Hamburg. There, he would be put on trial. Not for war crimes, but for, quote, denazification purposes. During the trial, the judge read a glowing affidavit personally written by Dulles, recommending that Wolf not be prosecuted. The ever-loyal Gavernitz appeared at the trial and provided a personal character witness to Wolf. Ultimately, Wolf's sentencing was influenced by these powerful actors, and he was only sentenced to 4 years for being a member of the SS and being aware of the horrible crimes. Once again, the restless Dulles lobbied a bit more and got his sentence reduced to time served. Wolf was a free man in Europe in June 1949. So I really wanted to illustrate this story because it just, first of all, I think it's a very interesting story just from a purely intelligence point of view. It reads much like a real-life James Bond story, maybe a bit of a perverted one since, the forces that the OSS were fighting for at this time were not exactly noble. But also, I wanted to raise this just to show what the fate of these people ended up being, especially Karl Wolf. So Karl Wolf lived out the rest of his days in post-war Germany, working as an advertising executive, as he had before the war. In the 1950s, he would form a neo-fascist party in Germany called Rexenferret. I might have mispronounced that. And in 1956, he formed a men's club for former SS officers. Thanks to Dulles' hard work and determination, another horrible Nazi war criminal walked freely in post-war Europe. And that had been the plan from the beginning, to keep as many of these elements around to be used in the post-war environment.
Yep. And that's when you get NATO, which was founded by Nazis.
Up to this point, we have discussed Allen Dulles' exploits during the Second World War at the OSS in detail. But there were many other notable future CIA officers around him at the OSS that were working towards the same missions, that I think are equally as important to talk about. So with that being said, let's talk about James Jesus Angleton, the OSS station chief in Rome during World War II, and the future director of counterintelligence at the CIA until the 1970s. So we're talking about a long and enduring legacy with intelligence. Let's get into it. James Jesus Angleton was the son of Hugh Angleton, the owner of the National Cash Register Company and the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Italy. Hugh also worked with the OSS during the war, and was likely the reason his son was put in charge of the X2 program in Italy, the OSS's counterintelligence branch. Angleton Jr. was a Yale graduate, an avid poet, and also deeply paranoid for his entire life. Throughout his intelligence career, Angleton would skulk around the office buildings he occupied, accusing colleagues of communist sympathies and searching every room he entered for hidden bugs. Despite his paranoia, Angleton was a master of deception. He was always in the background of some of the OSS and the CIA's most significant operation. His elusiveness and tall skeletal appearance earned him the nickname of the Ghost, or the Cadaver, by his colleagues. Angleton was, amongst many things, an Anglophile, a ruthless anti-communist, a devout Roman Catholic. He was largely amoral, and most importantly to his career aspirations, he viewed Allen Dulles as a second father and a mentor. While stationed in Italy during the Second World War, Angleton would help Dulles smuggle key fascist elements out of occupied territories, most notably Junio Valerio Borghese, otherwise known as the Black Prince. Who was this Black Prince? Well, Junio Valerio Borghese was a former member of the Catholic black nobility, a fascist segment of the Italian aristocracy that had deep running connections with the Vatican. Throughout the war, Borghese fought alongside the Italian fascists, and unlike many of Mussolini's followers, the Black Prince refused to surrender. Late into the war, he led a short-lived, quote, solo republic, which was a group of hardline fascists that held out against partisan advances in northern Italy, even after Italy signed an armistice with the Allies in 1943. He led a militia group called Xmas that perpetuated untold horrors on the communist partisans funded by the Italian Communist Party, otherwise known as PCI. The Black Prince had crossed paths with good old General Wolfe before he was deported to a POW camp. The meeting was held at a villa on Garda Lake, and was also attended by Angleton. At this meeting, the Black Prince agreed to cooperate with the OSS's secret Operation Sunrise if he received clemency for his crimes. This debt was repaid, as when the Black Prince was arrested for war crimes in May of 1945, Angleton personally secured his release and picked him up from his detention center when he was freed in Milan. After freeing the Black Prince, Angleton and Wild Bill Donovan toyed with the idea of a scheme to install Borghese as the new king of Italy, at least in the Catholic-dominated South. Instead, they opted for a less high-profile plan, using Borghese as the commander of Gladio forces in Italy. So, Borghese was given U.S. State Department funds under the auspices of, quote, operational resources for the formation of an Italian police force and military. And just like that, the Black Prince was the commander of a shadow army in Italy. Borghese organized his army into 40 groups, 10 of which specialized in sabotage, 6 in espionage, propaganda, and escape tactics, which was essentially just another word for smuggling war criminals to South America and the Middle East, and a staggering 12 divisions dedicated to guerrilla fighting. These units were trained at the Italian island of Sardinia and pulled from hardline fascists and Italian monarchists. The groundwork for Gladio, the CIA's secret and murderous campaign against European communists, was set. The Black Prince, Earnhard Gehlen, and General Karl Wolff would get to work recruiting the future gladiators to perpetuate violence against leftists, orchestrate false flag events, and ensure that European fascism remained alive in a hidden but powerful network. But we will be saving all that for future parts. That's all I've got for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed the video. I am overwhelmed with the support that you've given me for my first part. Thank you so much for that. That really goes a long way and keeps me motivated to keep making these parts. For the next episode, just to give you a sneak preview, we're going to be looking at the OSS's activities in Asia, specifically in China and Southeast Asia in Burma. This will be an interesting link to draw, especially with future OSS operations and the French connection, and its instrumental link to Gladio. But that's for the next part. As for today, I hope you enjoyed this part. Please, as always, share any of your thoughts you have down in the comments. I read every single comment and I appreciate all of the feedback, so thank you so much. I hope the audio was a little bit better in this part. I do realize that it was quite quiet in the last part, so I did my best to try to make it louder in this one. So hopefully that's been fixed. With that being said, thank you again for watching. A like is free and it goes a long way to help me in the algorithm. Anything else, as well as like a subscribe, for example, goes a long way. So thank you so much for continuing to watch this series, and we will see you again shortly.
So that was part 2 of the history of CIA by Eyes Wide Open. I recommend giving them a subscribe. Yeah, interesting stuff. Thanks, OSS. Yeah, that the CIA was founded by Nazi sympathizers. Who would have thought? All right, so we're gonna move on to our final portion of the evening, which will be playing Star Trek Fleet Command. Before we do that, I'm gonna take a quick intermission so that I can set some things up, and then we will be right back. are back. So we're going to be playing Flight. All right. Hold on one second. All right. And we're back. some account stuff. All right, so this is Star Trek Fleet Command. So, you have a bunch of ships, and you go on different missions to do different tasks for various factions. All right, so I'm just gonna get all of my, and then you can build different stations. As well as pilot different ships with different crew members. Alright, so this is currently my ships. Yeah, so you can do a bunch of missions, missions to like build up your house, to defeat enemies, to yeah, and then you just complete tasks, get new crew members. Yeah, so this is one of my ships. They're all next-gen people. This is my second ship, which has Kurt, Cadet Kurt, which I can Enterprise Kurt, Badgie. And then each one of them gives them a different, gives them abilities, like a Riker, gives me increased attack, having Kirk gives me inspired morale, Badgie gives me dodge. Let's destroy some ships. Take some stuff. All right, we got some more stuff. Let's go mine by destroying. Let's mine. Let's see. This one. Right. Let's get them. Get them, boys and ladies and other things like We're just gonna try to do as many missions as possible. Chin Riley. So warp distance by 2. fair trial, you know? All right. Yeah, more likely than independent. Let's see what else there is to do. Alright, let's go defeat this boss guy. I do really like the soundtrack. I mean, it's kind of. I mean, I did really like the J.J. Abrams. thought they were good. I'm actually gonna end it for the night. Okay, well, and as always, thank you for tuning in. I'll try to see if I can do this again sometime this week. Maybe do some more gaming. Yeah. Otherwise, I will see you all when I see you all. Good night.